Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Off the Sidelines. My name is Matthew Limberni, and Benedict Rhodes is on the other side. We hope that all of you continue to stay safe, and especially during these tough times. Ben, have you been up to anything lately?
Not a lot, to be honest. I've been enjoying Bundesliga coming back, as we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then, um, rather than that, I haven't really been doing a whole lot. How about yourself?
Yeah, I've been doing all right. I've been just trying to keep busy, as I mentioned, and then I also actually tuned into NASCAR over the
Oh, yeah.
weekend, which is something to watch. But yeah, that's how I've been doing. Do you want to get us started?
Yeah, so this weekend was the return of the German top flight soccer league, the Bundesliga. It's sort of the first major league that started to return. Did you happen to catch any of that?
Yes, so I ended up I caught a couple of games over the weekend. I watched Dortmund and Schalke. I think I'm pronouncing it properly.
Schalke, oh, yeah.
Schalke, yeah. I watched that game over the weekend, and Dortmund, of course, being Dortmund, dominated 4-0. And I also watched Bayern Munich and Union Berlin on Sunday. Of course, Alphonso Davies, Canadian soccer player, is on Munich, so I watched that as well. Um, yeah, that's what I did. Which games did you watch?
Yeah, I watched both of those games as well. I also watched, I think it was Mainz versus Frankfurt.
Yeah.
And Borussia Mönchengladbach versus can't remember who they played now, but I watched them play too.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
and then the Dortmund and Bayern games were really good too. Like Dortmund were amazing. Um, like didn't start English forward Jadon Sancho, which is a little bit disappointed about. But yeah, that team is amazing, and they showed it again with a 4-0 win, and then Bayern Munich, of course, or Bayern Munich. They also won, and then Alphonso Davies had a pretty good game. I thought I got a lot of love from the commentators, which was nice to see. Yeah, I thought overall it was a pretty good weekend.
Nice. And what did you think about the empty stadiums? Like, did it look weird to you or anything?
It was pretty weird. I mean, obviously having the full stadiums would have been better because I think it's probably harder for players to sort of get the intensity from an empty stadium that they might if they had from a full stadium. I mean, so I mean I haven't heard any players talk about that necessarily, but from my outsider looking in kind of perspective, I imagine it would be harder to get sort of pumped up for a big game, especially Dortmund versus Schalke, which is like a pretty big derby. Um, I don't know. I thought it was obviously necessary. I thought it was kind of interesting to see what it was like, but I don't know. I thought it was pretty cool. As you can see, I forgot to mention I'm here in Dortmund, so that was an interesting atmosphere. What about you? What did you think of the empty stadiums?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, like you, I thought it was weird. I think also like seeing how they were social distancing on the benches. Of
Yeah,
course, the substitute players were wearing masks and gloves, of course, and just trying to stay as away from each other as possible. And also, I think it was Dortmund, if I'm not wrong. I saw a goal celebration.
yeah,
I saw them like social distancing too, which is also weird to see them just like celebrating because usually they're closer to each other, but of course now during this pandemic they can't
yeah.
really be close like that.
And
But
also after the game, they usually celebrate in front of the yellow wall, the big group of their fans. They usually go and sort of clap to them and sort of thank them for the support. And they still did that even though the stadium was empty. I think there was like one security guard and one ball kid there or something. But they still made the whole lap around the whole stadium, clapping everyone. That was pretty funny.
yeah, that's cool. Um, well, before the season, the season suspended, Bayern is still leading the Bundesliga, and they're still leading actually by 4 points after this weekend to Dortmund. Uh, do you think Dortmund has a chance to catch up to Munich?
Yeah, I think they have a chance. I think they obviously it's going to cause it'll be as a result of Bayern losing a couple of games, obviously. But I think they play each other coming up in a couple of weeks. So they need to win that game for sure to sort of close that gap. And then I think they obviously can do it. Like, they're a very talented team, and they definitely can win that title. But I still think it's Bayern Munich to lose because Bayern Munich like 1 through 11. Like every single player on that team is world class. So I don't know. I don't think they're going to take over Bayern, but it's obviously possible.
Yeah, it's definitely it'd be definitely tough to take them out. But Also, we've been talking recently about other leagues that have that maybe might follow the German soccer league's plan. Do you think? How do you think it would work out for, like, say, the Premier League or La Liga or any other league in Europe, or just in general?
Yeah, I think other leagues would have to do it if they want to come back in the next couple months.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I don't know. The Premier League did mass testing, and apparently today, I think it was 6 players and staff came back positive for COVID-19. So I get the feeling that the Premier League might not start up again soon. If that's gonna keep that number's gonna keep growing, for example, I don't think that they're gonna start up soon. But if they do, of course, it would have to be in closed stadiums, and same with La Liga as well. Like I think La Liga players are training again. So and other leagues too, like I think the Serie A and Italy are training as well. So I think it depends on not only the country's restrictions, but also if all the players can sort of be tested negative for the virus.
Yeah, well, obviously they can't, as we've mentioned before. Like, no one can play without fans right now because
Yeah,
that's how this virus spreads. But yeah, I definitely think, like, I think you mentioned that the Premier League was considering returning in mid-June. I think also La Liga too.
yeah,
I think it depends on, like, the situation of COVID in each country, because there's uh, more hit countries than others. So I think it depends on that, and also the guidelines each country has for returning to sports. Because I know the English Prime Minister Boris Johnson now, like, said that June would be the earliest for
yeah. June
for the
first, I think.
June June
Yeah,
1st, yeah,
yeah,
for Premier League to return, and I guess any other sports leagues in England. But yeah, I think it just depends on the guidelines from each for each country.
yeah,
Okay, and moving on, we've been talking. We also talked about MLB returning from COVID-19. A player, actually, Bryce Harper, who's on the Phillies, had his own MLB idea, and we thought we'd read out what he put. Uh, so he said that uh, games would start in July, the first day in July. So we would have 31 days of baseball in July. And also in August, we would also have 31 days. And September would follow 30 days with October 31. And then we would eventually lead to a World Series in November for 15 days. And he also said that instead of, because originally MLB said they wanted to play 82 games as a consideration, but he said play 135 games. And in regards to off days, which is almost rare in the MLB, he said have an off day every 2 weeks on a Monday and a Sunday doubleheader. And also in regards to players, he mentioned having 30 players and a 6-man rotation, one up from the regular 5-man rotation. And and of course, we also mentioned that MLB was considering having a universal DH this season too, if they do return. But he said DH would be the same too.
yeah. I think the DH should stay the same. I think why change it, right? I don't really say that should be affected by the virus. But some other ideas that Bryce Harper had was he wants there to be a playoffs, including a 2-week World Series, kind of like the Super Bowl week, and so a 10-team round robin format, like the College World Series. Um, for example, maybe at the new stadium the Texas Rangers are building and they're going to play at, or whatever stadiums are sort of available to play at. Uh, 3-game series. If you win, you move on. If you lose, you play the other loser in the 1-game wild card to then move on again. And the team, the loser of the game of the losers, if that makes sense, is also out. Then the 2 teams eventually left would play a 7-game World Series, 2 days off before the series. And Bryce mentioned the idea of having in those 2 days an All-Star game and a home run derby, but I don't think that makes sense personally because if you're going to go straight into the World Series, there are going to be players who want to play in the All-Star game or play in the home run derby. So I think it would make sense to do that during spring training, or maybe just cancel the All-Star game altogether for this season. But another idea that Bryce Harper had was making this game available on all platforms without blackouts, so everyone's able to watch MLB. So Matthew, what do you think overall of Bryce Harper's plan, and what sort of ideas stand out to you the most?
Yeah, overall, I do like it. I mean, uh, there are some points that he mentioned in his post that I don't think would work out. I think an All-Star game wouldn't be necessary this year, especially the competition. Like usually, it's not really that competitive. So I don't think having an All-Star game or even a home run derby would be right for this season. So I think that should be scrapped for this season. Also, I do like his idea of like the World Series, like having it in November. I think that maybe you can consider having it in a warmer state, like maybe like Texas or Florida, or California, for example, which would be more ideal because you don't want to play it when it's snowing like crazy, even though there's already
Definitely on
game.
Toronto.
Yeah, like Toronto
Well,
or
we have a roof here, I guess, but still.
yeah, or like any northern states. Like I think like I mean, even though they're still playing in World
Minnesota.
Series games, some pardon?
Like in Minnesota or something, or New York even. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, I think having it in a warmer climate would make more sense for them. But yeah, also I do like also I was going to mention that just as a point MLB made, I do think that having like maybe three hub cities and 10 teams in each city would make sense too. Like because I know a couple of states, as we're going to mention later, have already opened up for sports as early as June for some of them, already
yeah.
like late May for some. So I think that having like three main hubs for games is probably ideal. But what do you think about his plan overall?
Yeah, I like his idea of 135 games and the sort of schedule that he laid out. I kind of like that, and um, I do agree with you about the All Star game. I think they need to either do it in the spring of training or something next year and move it way out, or maybe do it over the off season even, like after the season's done completely. Before spring training, like maybe do it in Hawaii, like the Pro Bowl or something. I don't know, but do it somewhere warm and over the winter maybe, or just scrap it completely for this season. Um, yeah, overall, I really like his idea, and I can't hope MLB goes with it. And I don't think they will, but I don't know, I do quite like it.
Yeah, what do you think about like hub cities? Like, do you think that they should consider like having three or like how do you think they should plan that?
Yeah, I think they should either do three. Like, I think we mentioned in a previous episode of Off the Sidelines, maybe like Arizona, Texas, and Florida, maybe like a city in each of those states. Either that, maybe, or having two, like Grapefruit League and Cactus League, kind of spring training format, maybe 15 in each one. But I definitely think they need to break it up a little bit and then not have all 30 in one city. So, yeah, I think maybe let's say like where the Diamondbacks play, where the Rays play, and where uh, I don't know, the new Texas Rangers Stadium or something, like one of those three venues would probably be an ideal location, I think.
Yeah, I think also something to consider too is like how would they plan out playing games every day? Because if you have, like we've mentioned, three hub cities, like if you have to play every day, you have to kind of schedule it
Yeah,
like differently. So I think like maybe having like a triple header every day,
like
or
1, 5, and 10 or something or whatever.
yeah, something like that, or like even maybe even a quadruple header if that would work somehow. But
But if you extra innings and stuff, that wouldn't work.
yeah, exactly.
Unless you
So
play
I
seven, let's play games with 7 innings instead of nine, maybe, or something like shorter games.
yeah, I think 7 innings would making them shorter and fitting in more games for would be probably ideal too.
Especially on the weekend, you could have maybe like two on Saturday or two on Sunday every week or something. So you do like 8 games a week, maybe, or 7 games a week, whatever you want to do if you want an off day. So I think double headers are probably going to be necessary at some point if the season's going to be finished in this calendar year.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just going to mention because of course there's one Canadian team that,
Yeah,
of course, the Toronto Blue Jays, who of course there's travel restrictions now to the U.S. I think it's was extended or something
yeah,
today, but I think that do you think like they would have to be playing in their stadium in Dunedin? Do you agree?
yeah. Probably that'll definitely be like their training base. Let's say like if they were gonna be in the Florida hub, for example, I think they should probably start working already on getting players over the border. Because like, I don't think they're going to want 29 teams to have to come to Canada, or how many teams to have to come to Canada when they could just make, if they're going to play in closed stadiums, there's no point in them playing in Toronto this season at all, I don't think. Same with like TFC's talked about the possibility of having to play across the border. Over if they're not going to play, if they're not playing closed stadiums, there's no point in making them come across to Canada if they're not going to have any kind of home field advantage. So I don't know. I think it makes sense to sort of base some of these Canadian teams in the States for now until lots of fans back in the stadiums.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to see like in the next couple of weeks how what MLB announces when they'll return and all their whole plan.
Yeah. Another league which has been the sort of ideas for this league has been ramping up have been the NHL. We were very close to the end of the NHL season when this whole virus canceled the season or ended the season prematurely. And there's been a new playoff format being considered apparently, with 24 teams in 2 hub cities, 12 teams in each hub. Do you want to sort of talk a bit about that, Matthew?
Yeah, sure. So as mentioned, there's 2 hub cities that NHL is considering. They haven't confirmed these yet, but they're considering having 2 hub cities. They're considering having 12 teams in each city. Uh, of course, no one has confirmed yet, as I mentioned. And some states that have already been mentioned as considering to return, just leagues in general. But in regards to NHL, there's been uh, states like New York, Texas, California, Florida, and Arizona as well. Um, but yeah, do you think that a 24 team format for the playoffs would work?
I think it probably would work. I think it'd be easier to probably use a 16 team format though, but with maybe 8 in each hub city. Like I don't really understand why they're moving it to 24, but I think it would make sense. I think to have the 2 hub cities, the format. I'm not quite sure how it would work. It used to be like a bunch of extra wild card games almost, but yeah, I don't know. So I sort of wish it was 16 teams. I think that'd be easier to do the sort of traditional sort of formatting. But yeah, I don't know. Overall, I don't think they should go to New York. That's one thing. New York's being hit pretty hard right now by this virus. I think that's probably a state to stay away from, even if there is benefits to going there, like suitable arenas, for example. A lot of arenas in New York. But I think they should probably look at some of those other states that we've been mentioning for all these leagues, like Texas, Florida, Arizona. That's going to be the big 3, I think, for all the leagues. What about you? What do you think of the format and the potential hub cities or hub states?
Well, I think 24 teams is definitely a lot for, especially for those teams that weren't really in it,
Yeah,
that aren't
the
really in
24th team.
the 20. Yeah, exactly. I think that this would benefit teams like obviously that are in the 17 to 24 place, like the Rangers, for example. I think the Canadians too,
The Leafs.
and and yeah, a couple more too. But I think that I think that might be too much. I think that sticking to the 16 team format would be more ideal. Um,
Especially for
I think
scheduling.
yeah, or also maybe they can have like maybe they can have a little tournament or something for the 8 teams,
Yeah.
like for the 16 or 17 to 24, just so they're not being left out, I guess. But I don't think that would I don't think that would work well.
Then you might as well have the other, what is it, 7 teams as well. And just have like another tournament for them, just or like some kind of like games just to play.
Yeah, I think that I mean I wouldn't know like how they would even format the like the first round, then going into the second round and all that. Like they if they had to have 12 teams in each city, like they probably have like 1 to 12, 2 to 11, like NBA stylish.
Yeah.
But I think that having
Or maybe
24
like
teams,
the top 2 seeds go through automatically, and then the top 2 in each hub go through automatically, and then 2 3 plays 6 and 4 plays 5, and then the 2 winners join the other 2 to make it 8 on each hub or something.
yeah, sort of
That's
like
the only thing I
yeah,
can think of.
yeah. But I think also in regards to like where they should play, I think I agree with you. New York definitely shouldn't be an option at this point, considering how hard they're getting hit. I think looking at like Arizona, California, and Florida, and also Texas would be ideal. I don't know if any of like smaller states that have announced that like they can allow pro sports to come into their state,
Yeah.
but I think that having it in like one of the 4 that I mentioned probably be ideal.
Yeah, then the problem with having it in one of those states, of course, is like most of the hockey arenas in North America are in like Canada and the northern half of the United States. Like Arizona, there's not a ton of hockey rinks, I don't think. So that might be a problem. I mean, there's probably enough to make it possible, obviously, but I don't know if that's an ideal state if you want to have 12 teams playing there every day. I don't know how possible that is going to work.
Yeah, and also like we mentioned for the MLB, like the scheduling, like
Yeah,
how would they be scheduling like six playoff how do I say this, six playoff series in each city? Like
and
that would
then
be
yeah, and
tough.
then move it down to four probably, then two, and then where would you host the Stanley Cup?
Yeah,
You can't
that's
host Stanley Cup in. You probably won't go between two hubs. So which hub would you play it in?
yeah,
And
that's
I don't know.
another
So
thing.
it's a lot. And obviously there'd be no Stanley Cup parade. I mean that's minor at this point, but it's sort of like a another wrinkle in this sort of strange season we're having right now.
Yeah, definitely even like you mentioned, having a Stanley Cup final, like where would they host it
Yeah.
would be also something that'd be interesting. But yeah, we're gonna move on, and as we've been doing in our past episodes of Off the Sidelines, we've been naming our best team from any league to win a championship from the past decade. So we've done all four sports leagues now. So now we're gonna move on to the MLS for this week. So I'll start off with mine. So I decided to go with the Toronto FC team from 2017. That year was definitely they were definitely on fire as they posted a 29-5 record, wins, decision, losses, which was good enough for winning the Supporter Shield. Their playoff run was also definitely something not to forget, just like the 2016 playoffs. Starting off in the conference semifinals, they faced off against the New York Red Bulls, winning the first leg 2-1 in New York, and then losing 1-0 in Toronto. Although they were tied on aggregate 2-2, winning in New York was definitely good enough for them to move to the final, East Final. And in the East Final, after having no goals scored in the first leg, Altidore came in clutch in the second leg, as he usually does, in the
Yeah.
60th minute, eventually sending TFC to the MLS Cup final again for the second straight year, where they faced off against the Seattle Sounders again. Of course, they were looking to get a revenge on Seattle after they lost the cup in previous year in penalties, which was definitely heartbreaking for the
Yeah.
team.
For sure.
Um, both teams were tied going into halftime, and as I mentioned, Altidore came up clutch again in the 67th minute, and with Vasquez closing the game in extra time, TFC won their first championship in its franchise history. And in regards to players, they definitely and they still do have a very stacked roster, I should say, with players including former forward Sebastian Giovinco, forward Josie Altidore, and midfielders Michael Bradley and Victor Vasquez. Do you want to name your team now?
But yeah, I just want to say, like, I think the 2017 Toronto FC team, like, when talking about an individual season in MLS history, but not even just the last 10 years, I think the 2017 Toronto FC team is obviously the greatest team of all time. But I think in terms of um, maybe importance to MLS, I've gone with a different team. I've gone with the 2011 LA Galaxy, which kind of explains the shirt I'm wearing, which as you can maybe see is a David Beckham LA Galaxy jersey from around that time period. Um, and yeah, after Beckham moved to the team in 2007, it was sort of MLS's big break almost. Like it was sort of thing that put them on the international map almost. And after a few years without winning a cup, the Galaxy needed to win one to sort of equal all the great stuff they're doing off the pitch. And 2011 is the season they finally did it. Um, and they lost the 2009 MLS Cup to to Real Salt Lake on penalties. So there's redemption for that as well. And led by legendary manager Bruce Arena, the LA Galaxy went on to only lose 5 of their 34 games, same with TFC, and won their second consecutive Supporters Shield. And before beating some very good teams in the playoffs, including Thierry Henry's New York Red Bulls and Real Salt Lake, who I just mentioned, they beat them in the conference final. And then in the final, they beat a very good Houston Dynamo team as well to win their 4th MLS Cup. And as I mentioned, that team was very, very stacked, full of a lot of MLS, not only MLS legends, but also just international soccer legends. like Robbie Keane, Landon Donovan, David Beckham, and current Toronto FC defender Omar Gonzalez as well. So that team was stacked, and I think that MLS Cup sort of proved that the David Beckham experiment has sort of finally paid off.
Yeah, definitely. When you get David Beckham on your team, I mean, like especially for the MLS, it was
Yeah,
definitely a revolution for the league.
yeah, pun fully intended. New
Yeah,
England Revolution.
definitely. Yeah.
um, and then speaking of old soccer games, there's been a lot of games being shown recently on TV. Of course, we've been mentioning some throwback games we've been watching over the last few episodes of this. So, Matthew, what throwback games have you been watching over the last week?
Well, starting yesterday on Monday, games from the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, which I forgot about, are starting to air live on TV. So I started watching that, and of course, the tournament was taking place in Toronto with two groups of four teams. Of course, the usual hockey countries or powerhouses, I should say, Canada, U.S., Russia, were all involved, etc. And also in this tournament, there's also two continental teams, the Team Europe and North America, which was I think it was definitely great for the tournament to have. And in the best of three final, Canada, of course, dominated Europe, winning the series 2-0. So that's one thing I've been watching. Also, I've seen some games from the great Roy Halladay from his time with the Phillies and Blue Jays. With his most notable one, of course, him pitching a no-hitter against the Cincinnati Reds in the 2010 MLB playoffs. That was definitely something great to watch.
Yeah, I've also been watching a couple of those World Cup of hockey games. Again, I like you, I didn't even remember the tournament existed to be honest. Um, but I've also watched a couple of those Roy Halladay Blue Jays games, and also a bit of old tennis. Like a lot of matches from the 2015 U.S. Open have been shown, including both semifinals and the final. The final, of course, between two of the greatest tennis players of all time, Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic, which was won by Novak. And one of my favorite players of all time, Andy Murray, his dramatic game against South African Kevin Anderson in the fourth round. The all Swiss semifinal with Federer and Stan Wawrinka. Like, there's so many amazing matches in that tournament, which is why it's so one of the best tournaments I've ever watched. Certainly, yeah, I'm watching a lot of old tennis. And just quickly, I know this wasn't on our rundown here, but I just kind of remember since you mentioned the World Cup of hockey. This is another thing I want to add here. Do you think that they should bring something like that back? Obviously not at the moment with the whole virus, but is that something you'd like to see happen again in the next couple of years, do you think?
Oh,
Because I really like the idea of the Team Europe and the Team North America, for example, like having a chance for some of these players to play meaningful international hockey. I mean, when someone from, I don't know, Latvia might not usually, but now they get a chance to play with players from other countries, for example. Like, do you think that at least a tournament with a Team Europe generally would make sense?
yeah, I think it would be great for them to bring this back. Of course, as you said, we can't bring it back in the now or next year, but
Yeah.
because of pandemic. But I think it'd be great for them to bring this back. I mean, like that was definitely as I mentioned, I really forgot about it, but it was definitely a great tournament from when I watched it 4 years ago. I think also having the two continental teams would also be great for them, especially for those players who didn't get a chance to actually make one of the teams that have qualified, one of the countries that have qualified. So I think that having that would be great, and especially with it brings I should say it brings like hockey to another level. I guess I should say like having when it was in Toronto, like the atmosphere I remember being was it was definitely like great to see. So I think bringing it back would definitely be a great idea. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially if the NHL players don't go to the Olympics again, for example. I think maybe in the next um, Winter Olympics are supposed to be 2022. So I think maybe let's say they don't play in those Olympics in sort of January, February 2022, whenever it's going to be. Maybe after the season's done in the summer sometime, maybe have another World Cup of hockey. I think that'd be cool. The NHL would have to allow their players to do it, of course. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. But yeah, I'd love to see that happen again.
Yeah, I think if I'm not wrong, I think it was in September that the World Cup of Hockey was what happened. So I think this was
Just at the
before the
start of the
NH
season.
Yeah, just before the start. So I think that having it like in the same time, I think it's definitely like it's almost like a preseason for NHL teams
So
before the actual season.
competitive preseason.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, and before we finish our video today, we have a new video that will be coming up on Thursday, where me and Ben will be talking about our MLB expansion videos, giving our ideas of what city should be next on the MLB's expansion list. I mean, although it has been a while with, in that regard, but we'll be talking about that on Thursday with a special guest.
Yeah.
Ben, do you want to
Yeah,
say?
so we won't tell you too much about it, but yeah, we'll have a special guest. My friend Nick will be coming on, joining the show, and we'll also be making up our own theoretical sort of MLB expansion team. So I won't tell you too much about it, but yeah, we'll be filming that on Thursday. It might come out on Thursday, maybe a couple days later, but yeah, definitely watch out for that video.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, that concludes episode 6 of our Off the Sidelines. My name's Matthew Limberti and Benedict
Yeah,
Rhodes.
mine's Benedict Rhodes,
Benedict
and
Rhodes.
again,
Thank you guys for watching.
thanks for watching, guys.
Bye.